The troops in contact call came over the net at 4:48, and the rotors were already spinning before the second transmission finished. I was Captain Raval Hurst, Flight Operations Officer at Kestrel Forward Air Base, and I had spent 2 years behind that desk when I made the decision I still return to in my quieter moments. It did not feel dramatic at the time. Procedure rarely does. It was only later, standing on the flight line in the ash-gray morning light, watching an Apache come in with a cracked canopy, and a pilot who had held an extraction corridor open against 2 armed technicals and a repositioning mortar crew, that I understood what my procedure had actually meant for 12 men in a valley I could not see. The call was a Bravo element in Sorrhen Valley, 12 men pinned behind a granite ridgeline, taking fire from 3 sides, their ground vehicles disabled, and 1 man already hit. The extraction bird was inbound but needed time, and time required someone to go in and suppress the positions long enough for the landing zone to open. They needed close air support in the next 20 minutes, or the numbers would change in the kind of way that cannot be corrected after the fact. We had 2 Apache available. One was standard mission ready on the rotation. The other had been signed off at first light by Lieutenant Commander Dara Wesson, who had taken it up for the pre-dawn systems check, certified it operational, logged the entry, and was now standing at the line in her flight suit waiting for a tasking assignment. I gave the first bird to Captain Emery Stooks, 400 hours in type, 18 months working out of Kestrel. I knew his reflexes on the gun, and I knew how he thought through an engagement. He was a good pilot. Wesson's bird is also mission-ready, my line chief, Sergeant Major Dobb, said from beside me. He said it the way a man who respects your authority still believes you should have a complete picture. She's qualified on all systems, nitrated and current on the Hellfire sequence. I know. He let it rest there. He had made the information available, and he trusted me to use it. What I did not say, and I have no version of this that reflects well on me, was that I had not made my peace with Wesson. She had transferred to Kestrel 6 weeks prior from a base I had limited coordination history with, and she had arrived carrying a service record I had been given no adequate time to read closely, and a manner that was quiet in a way I had not yet learned to read. She was younger than I expected for her grade. She was the only woman on the flight line. She had a habit at briefings of standing slightly to the outside of the group, never late, never inattentive, but positioned as if she had already absorbed the content and was simply being courteous by remaining present. I did not dislike her. I simply had not finished arriving at an opinion, and when Sorrhen Valley came over the net at 4:48, I defaulted to the name I had already read. Stooks launched in 6 minutes. Clean radio work, solid departure, tracking well for the inbound leg. Then 7 minutes out, his fire control system flagged a targeting fault, not catastrophic, a degradation in the precision engagement suite that made reliable night acquisition uncertain. He called it in with the calm I had always associated with him, and I told him to hold altitude, maintain corridor presence, and show the element that someone was up there while I worked the problem. Which left me standing at the radio with Wesson at my elbow. She had not rushed to get there. She was simply there when I turned, as if she had calculated where the conversation was going and had positioned accordingly. "The element has 14 minutes, she said, not a recommendation, not a challenge. A number delivered with the precision of a woman who had already done the arithmetic before speaking it. I looked at the aircraft on the line. I looked at her. I thought about 6 weeks of standing at the edge of briefings. "You're up," I said. She was in the cockpit in under 4 minutes. She was airborne in 6. I watched the running lights arc south off the end of the runway and disappear into the dark valley air, and I went back to the radio and tried to keep 12 men alive while I waited. What happened in Sorrhen Valley I did not see. I heard it in real time on the net, and I read it in the post-engagement debrief, and I heard it again from every man in Bravo element who was able to speak in the days that followed. The essential facts did not change across any of those accounts. She came in on the first run from the eastern slope, which was not the textbook approach angle. The valley gradient on that side gave her a shorter acquisition window and a harder pull-off at the end of the gun run. She took it because that approach line placed her aircraft between the Bravo element and the heaviest gun position. Stooks, holding above at altitude, noted on the radio that she had chosen the more demanding angle. She did not respond to the observation. The first Hellfire went centermass on the northern technical. The second round corrected 14 meters south for the slope and landed on the gun crew that had already begun repositioning. Both hits fell within 90 seconds of her arrival over the valley. Captain Devlin Marsh, commanding the Bravo element, told me later that when the northern technical went up, his men had stopped firing for 3 full seconds. Their minds could not immediately process that something had arrived to help them after 22 minutes of taking it alone. Those 3 seconds cost them nothing. The follow-through was already happening above them. Marsh said it was the most organized piece of rotary wing work he had seen across 3 deployments. On the second pass, she went for the mortar position, coming in lower than Stooks had operated and making the acquisition run that a degraded targeting system could not have executed cleanly at that altitude. Single Hydra rocket pod. 3 rounds. The crew broke on the second one, and she tracked their displacement and called it on the net in plain, precise language so that Marsh's ground element could orient their weapons to cover the movement. She ran 4 passes in 12 minutes. When the extraction bird settled into the valley landing zone, the ridgeline was quiet. Not suppressed and waiting, quiet. Every position that had been working that granite since before 4:30 had been neutralized or pushed past the point of regrouping in time to matter. She landed at Kestrel at 5:42. I walked out to the flight line when the canopy cracked open and she climbed down. The canopy had a spiderweb impact star in the upper left quadrant, a round from the technical that had relocated between her second and third pass and gotten a firing solution before she closed the distance on it. She had continued the engagement without breaking off, completed 2 more runs, and called the objective clear. She pulled her helmet off and looked at the cracked canopy with the detached expression of a pilot cataloging a maintenance discrepancy on a walk around. "Bird needs a canopy," she said to Dobb. "Yes, ma'am," Dobb said. There was a quality in his voice I had not heard from him in 18 months. I had not prepared anything. I had not anticipated needing to. I stood on the flight line in the early light and said what I could say accurately. "Outstanding work, Lieutenant Commander." She looked at me directly. She did not deflect the assessment. She said, "They needed 10 more minutes. I gave them 12. It was not self-promotion. She was noting the margin the way an engineer notes a tolerance, because the number was the relevant fact in any honest accounting of what had occurred. "Yes," I said, "you did." 2 days later, Rear Admiral Callum Stayer arrived at Kestrel for a scheduled inspection tour of forward air assets. He walked the flight line with my commanding officer and with me, and when we reached the Apache with its freshly replaced canopy, he stopped and studied the aircraft. "Whose bird?" he asked. "Lieutenant Commander Wesson's, sir," Dobb said. "She flew the Sorrhen Valley close air support 2 nights ago." Stayer stood there a moment. "I've read the post-engagement debrief." "Yes, sir." "I've also read her complete service record." He said it with care, the way a man handles something he has decided deserves a proper weight. I had not, by that morning, finished reading it myself. I had read enough to understand that I should have read it the day she arrived. "What base did she transfer from?" Stayer asked. "I named it." He nodded slowly. 2 years ago I was at that base for a scheduled live-fire evaluation. There was a pilot on the range that morning who made the entire demonstration look like it belonged to a different class of instruction. The target sequencing, the low-level gun runs, the transition times. I have been at a great many range evaluations in 31 years, and I have not seen work like that from a rotary wing asset before or since. He turned his eyes down the flight line to where Wesson was beginning her pre-flight checks on the repaired aircraft. I found out afterward that it was a lieutenant commander. I asked for the name and wrote it in my notebook. I had no reason at the time to expect I would encounter it again. He paused for a moment that was not for effect. "Best airborne gunnery I have seen in this uniform," he said. He said it the way a man states a measurement that has sat in his mind for 2 years, and has now found a context where saying it aloud is the honest and appropriate thing to do. I did not have a response that did not require acknowledging, at minimum privately, how precisely I had miscalculated the woman doing her pre-flight 40 meters away. That afternoon Admiral Stayer walked out to the flight line without an escort and without ceremony and found Wesson himself. I watched from the operations window. She saw him coming and came to attention. They spoke for perhaps 3 minutes. At the end he said something and she responded, and then he offered his hand and she took it. Dobb told me later what was said. Stayer had told her that he had been at the evaluation range 2 years prior, and that her work that morning remained the finest airborne gunnery demonstration he had encountered in a career that had included 3 decades of flight operations. He had asked her why the Sorrhen engagement had not generated a formal recommendation. She had told him the element came home intact. That was the recognition she had wanted. He shook her hand and used her call sign when he said it. Stormcrow. She had not used the call sign at Kestrel, had not mentioned it or the history behind it, same as she had not volunteered any other detail about herself in 6 weeks of standing quietly at the edge of briefings. Stayer had it from a file he had actually taken the time to read. I finished her service record that evening. It ran to 37 pages. The decorations began on page 4. I read that page twice. The evaluation range documentation Stayer had referenced appeared on page 12, with the range officer's notes and scores that I had no ready framework to contextualize because I had never encountered their equal. There were 3 letters of commendation from fleet commanders, 2 written after engagements she had apparently never mentioned to anyone at Kestrel. There were 6 pages of operational annotations I cannot discuss in open forum. The file was a 37-page answer to a question I had never thought to ask when she walked through the door. I revised the flight rotation the next morning. Wesson took the first slot. She has held it since without incident and without interruption. I have been in flight operations for 11 years. I have made hundreds of decisions about which pilot gets a tasking and when. Most of those decisions I do not revisit. One I come back to not because it ended in catastrophe, because 12 men came home, but because of what it laid bare about the distance between what I had assumed and what I had actually taken the time to establish. She did not argue that distance. She did not name it. She flew 12 minutes over a valley in the dark with a cracked canopy, and an element that had been on the edge of running out of options, and she gave them the time they needed. That was the argument. The morning she made commander, the ceremony ran about 4 minutes insignia, a few words, the end of a briefing. When it was over, the men on the flight line started clapping. Nobody organized it or called for it. It began the way things begin when a truth has been established past any need for ceremony to carry the weight. She stood in the quiet after and nodded once. Then she asked Dobb if her bird was ready for the morning check. It was.